I'm going to show you something doubly misleading. Imagine that this tube represents all the energy humanity used in 2023. So that's electricity, but also energy used in transport, heating, industry, everything. Where did that energy come from? Well, the largest chunk was supplied by oil, contributing 35.6% of total energy demand. Next, coal, which contributed 29.7%, and then gas, natural gas, which supplied 26.2% of energy demand. Okay, hydropower contributed 2.8%, nuclear 1.8%, and solar, wind, and all renewables contributed 3.9%. So all renewables together contributed 6.7% of our energy, and nuclear another 1.8%. So just 8.5% of global energy in 2023 was supplied by low-carbon, clean sources. Oh dear. This is extremely bad news because the vast majority of our carbon emissions are associated with our use of energy. So if we want the world to get to net zero emissions, we need to get the percentage of clean energy from 8.5 to, well, 100. It doesn't seem possible, does it? All our efforts to date and just 8.5% of our energy is clean? In fact, we can illustrate the scale of the problem with a simple calculation.
Let's imagine that we want to get all our energy from wind power. A large onshore wind turbine produces 3 megawatts of power. That's its maximum power output at a given time. Over a year, with some windy conditions but also some still conditions, a reasonable estimate for how much energy that will generate is about 6 gigawatt hours.
Last year, the world used approximately 180,000 terawatt hours of energy, so 180 million gigawatt hours. If we divide that number by the energy supplied by a wind turbine in a year, we find that we would need approximately 30 million wind turbines to supply the world's energy.
If you assume that each turbine needs 30 acres of land, that would imply an area of 900 million acres for our energy supply. That's roughly the area of land used for agriculture in the United States. A similar estimate for solar power, assuming average conditions in the mid-latitudes, requires a little under 200 million acres of land to generate the world's energy supply.
Obviously, these are very broad estimates. I have assumed one type of onshore wind turbine. I've assumed one set of conditions for the weather. And as a retired engineer called Steve is writing in the comments right now, I've also neglected the primary downside of renewables: their intermittency.
The sun doesn't always shine and the wind doesn't always blow, which means you need to build more renewables than this simple estimate implies. If not using any kind of storage, you might need 5 times as many wind turbines to guarantee power, or with large-scale storage like batteries, maybe twice as many. Let's be optimistic and say you only need 60 million wind turbines to power the world.
Could you theoretically build this many renewables? Yeah. Is anybody going to? Absolutely not, no. But what if I told you you don't need to? In fact, you could power the world with clean energy. In fact, just with renewables, with nothing like this outlay of space and money. Up to a point. And it's because of this. Imagine that you want to get light from a light bulb. Well, that energy in the form of light is initially stored as energy in a fuel. Let's say, for the sake of argument, coal. That energy in the coal is referred to as the primary energy. You then burn the coal in a power plant to generate electricity, but you don't get all of the energy trapped in the coal as electricity. You lose some of it, mostly as heat. Then you have your electricity, which is what we call secondary energy, which needs to be transmitted to you in your home. That also has losses associated with it, though nowhere near as much. And then in your home, you have electricity to supply to the bulb, what we call final energy. But you don't perfectly convert final energy into useful energy, in this case, light from the bulb. In fact, an old bulb like this actually converts most of the energy supplied to it into heat rather than light. So at every stage, from primary energy to useful energy, the thing we actually care about, you experience energy losses.
In the case of coal, about 2/3 of primary energy is wasted as heat. Transmission losses tend to be about 5%, and an old bulb like this loses 95% of its energy as heat. In other words, for every 1,000 units of primary energy as coal, you only get 15 units of useful energy as light.
But what if instead of burning coal, you generated electricity via a wind turbine? In this case, you're not burning a fuel, so there is no primary energy. I mean, technically it's the kinetic energy of the atmosphere, but you don't have to supply that. So you just start with your electrical energy, which then experiences transmission losses as it's transmitted to you in your home, and then losses again in the bulb going from final energy to useful energy. But for every 1,000 units of energy that enter the system, you end up with over 47 units of useful energy. So this tube represented the primary energy used by the world in 2023. But as we have seen, comparing electricity generated by renewables and nuclear with that generated by burning a fuel is misleading, because a lot of the primary energy in the fuel is just wasted. If you crudely account for this thermal inefficiency with what's called the substitution method, you find that the world actually got 13.8% of its energy from renewables and another 4% from nuclear. So in total, 17.8% of global energy came from low carbon sources, almost exactly double what I previously said. So if we want to get to 100% clean energy, we're actually starting from a higher baseline than we thought. Or equivalently, we need to generate less energy than we thought. But hold on, because this graph was doubly misleading. And here's why. Only 20% of final energy demand is in the form of electricity. 30% is transport and about 50% is heating in one form or another. So far, we've just talked about electricity because it's really easy to generate clean electricity, but it's the smallest part of the pie. If you want to use only clean energy, you need to work out how to move things and heat things cleanly.
How do you do that? Well, with some notable exceptions, you electrify those things.
If you make something run on electricity, then you can get that electricity from clean sources. But that's not all. Consider powering a car. Most cars at the moment get their primary energy from oil, which needs to be extracted, refined into gasoline with energy losses, transported to the pump with some energy losses, and then burned in the car with energy losses. For a gas-powered car in North America, of the 1,000 units of primary energy as crude oil, approximately 830 make it to the tank in the form of gasoline, which is honestly incredible. That's like a modern miracle. Anyway, unfortunately, the car only translates final energy into useful energy as motion with 25% efficiency. Most of the losses are as heat in the engine. So for every 1,000 units of primary energy, you get about 210 units of useful energy. By comparison, a car with an electric motor converts final energy in the form of electricity into useful energy with an efficiency of about 90%, 70% if you don't have regenerative braking. So with transmission losses being about 5%, for every 1,000 units of electrical energy, you get between 665 and 855 units of useful energy.
Of course, if you burn fuel to generate your electricity, the efficiency is lower, but analysis on Yale Climate Connections estimates that on average in the US, an EV uses a bit less than half the energy of a gasoline-powered vehicle. In states with clean grids, it's much less. And before anybody says it, yes, it takes more energy and so more emissions to build an EV, but analysis shows that the lifetime environmental impact is much lower, less than half the emissions of a gasoline car in the US, and even lower in places with cleaner grids.
In general, if you electrify a form of transport, not only can you make it run on clean energy, you also require less energy to make it run. it's more efficient. Like replacing a filament bulb with an LED. You are just reducing the energy losses going from your primary energy to useful energy, reducing the amount of energy you actually need to supply. This is also the case in heating, especially if you're heating a building. Air source heat pumps have efficiencies of over 100% because they extract useful energy from the surrounding air. That's how they work. So it actually doesn't matter how efficient your gas boiler is, it's not going to have an efficiency of above 100%. An electrified world is an energy efficient world that requires less primary energy to accomplish the same tasks. And because transport and heating are such huge shares of all energy use, that has enormous implications for global energy demand.
A study in 2021 crudely estimated that efficiency improvements from electrifying heating and transport would reduce global energy demand by 40%. Hannah Ritchie has a neat write-up of it on her Substack. She has problems with it, as do I.
A surprising additional reduction in final energy demand, by the way, comes from international shipping. 40% of international bulk freight is just moving coal, oil, and gas somewhere else to be burned. So in a world with a clean energy mix, 40% of international freight just doesn't happen anymore. In short, if we replace our current energy system with a clean, electrified system, we don't need to fill this tube. We need to fill maybe this one. We need to supply less energy than we currently do. And we're already supplying a decent fraction of what we actually need from clean sources.
You won't need 60 million wind turbines. The problem is half the size. And, of course, in the real world, you would have a combination of energy sources like wind, but also solar, hydro, geothermal, and nuclear that compensate for each other's weaknesses. It's a large number of renewables still, but it's absolutely achievable.
Except there are two huge problems standing in the way of powering the world with just clean energy. Firstly, not everything can be made to run on electricity. Aviation, for example, current technology only allows for the shortest distance flights to be electrified. Same goes for international shipping. And there are plenty of industrial processes that require high energy densities, like, for example, cement kilns.
And for the time being, these use cases and others require burning a fuel. Making that fuel clean is not an impossible obstacle to overcome. It's possible to grow carbon-neutral biofuels, though whether this is possible at scale remains to be seen. And many industrial processes are also looking to green hydrogen as their fuel. That's hydrogen produced by electrolysis of water powered by clean electricity. Definitely viable at scale for certain applications.
But the second problem is much, much bigger. This is how much primary energy we needed in 2023. This is how much primary energy we needed in 1965. The world has an ever-increasing appetite for energy, about 1 to 2% growth in primary energy demand per year. And to be clear, this incredible rise in our use of energy has made the modern world possible. It has improved living conditions, raised life expectancies around the world. But if we're talking about transitioning to a 100% clean energy system, we have to account for the fact that demand for useful energy in that system will increase as that transition is happening. But also, as systems get more efficient, historically, people have just started using those systems more often in what's called a rebound effect. Historically, this has been a 10 to 30% increase in demand for useful energy. So on the one hand, electrifying systems reduces the amount of primary energy we need to supply. But on the other hand, growth increases the amount of useful energy we need to supply. Which one of these factors will win? Well, before I tell you though, I can only do this job thanks to the support of my patrons. So I just wanted to take a moment to say a massive thank you to them. You can see some of their lovely names on the screen right now.
If you would like to help me make more videos, but also get exclusive extra content every month, including a behind-the-scenes vlog, here's a sneak peek of that, and at producer tier and higher vote on a video topic a month, you can sign up at patreon.com/SimonOxFizz. Tiers start at just $3 a month, and I'm not exaggerating when I say I couldn't do this job without the support of my patrons, so thank you.
With a special thank you to Damien, Paul Moser, and Alan G. Now, back to those two factors. Which will win, efficiency gains or growth? Well, last month, the UK Climate Change Committee published their 7th carbon budget. This is advice written by an independent committee of experts established by the 2008 Climate Change Act that's given to the government to help them get to their target of net zero by 2050. There's lots of interesting stuff in this report. Notably, it slashed the estimated cost of getting the UK to net zero by 75% since the last report in 2020, but that's not what we're talking about here.
I want to talk about this graph. This shows the approximate flow of energy in the current energy system in the UK and what a clean energy system might look like in 2050. Let's look at the big numbers. Today, we need 1,859 terawatt hours of primary energy, which we convert into about 900 terawatt hours of useful energy. Compare that to the clean system, which they estimate starts with 1,249 terawatt hours of primary energy, which becomes 1,000 terawatt hours of useful energy.
So there's over 10% growth in useful energy demand. But efficiency gains reduce the amount of primary energy required by 1/3. So the efficiency gains win out over growth by 2050. And the way this is done is largely through electrification. Final energy in buildings, industry, and surface transport is overwhelmingly supplied by renewable sources, notably offshore wind. The overall amount of electrical energy supplied is more than double what it is today, but overall, final energy is much lower because of decreased energy losses. This was the case for the UK, so an advanced economy not experiencing rapid growth. It will not be the case for India or Vietnam, where primary energy demand will increase. But the global transition to a clean energy system will require far less clean energy capacity than simply looking at the growth in present-day energy demand implies. Even with the increase in demand in useful energy that will come, I don't see the amount of primary energy that we will need to supply in the mid-century to a clean power system being significantly larger than what we supply today.
And over the past 60 years, while energy demand has quadrupled, the share of clean energy in that mix has tripled. As the world increasingly electrifies heating and transport and continues to decarbonize power, maybe reaching 50% renewable power by 2030, this share of clean energy will increase faster and faster. Getting to a clean energy system is going to be easier than it looks.
But we cannot get too optimistic here. Right now, we are burning more coal, oil, and gas than at any time in human history. And at the moment, it is predicted that coal and gas demand will plateau, but maybe not fall by 2030, while peak oil, predicting that's like a fool's errand. I mean, honestly, who knows? The IEA think maybe before 2030. And what matters is the total emissions from burning those fuels. We can't get wrapped up in the clean energy percentage. It's the absolute terms, the absolute emissions from burning those fuels that matter and that we need to bring down. But as I say, in a world where primary energy consumption is not really growing and clean energy systems are increasingly cost competitive, an increased share of clean energy in the overall system will reflect a decrease in the amount of fuel we are burning. But that clean energy percentage can't get to 100.
If you look closely at this graph from the UK Climate Change Committee, you'll see that not everything is running on clean electricity. Notably, aviation and shipping still requires oil, hydrogen is burned in some applications in industry, and some gas is still burned for various purposes, including generating electricity. They've papered over that and made net emissions zero, with a not insignificant amount of carbon capture.
In any serious model of the energy transition, a small percentage of all energy is still not clean. There are simply technological limitations to what we can electrify or make run on a clean fuel like green hydrogen. We'll get to 50% clean energy easily. 75% sure. 90% probably. But that last hurdle from 90% to 100%, it isn't going to happen. And that's okay, as long as you have a plan to account for, to compensate for the emissions of that small percentage of dirty energy. After all, it's net zero emissions, not zero emissions. Though obviously the smaller the percentage of dirty energy you have to worry about, the easier your job doing that is. Because our tools for compensating for emissions are limited, there will almost certainly be some use of carbon capture and storage, overwhelmingly at the point where a fuel is burned, like in a cement plant, for example. But other tools are more low-tech.
Notably, improving carbon uptake by the natural world, protecting forests and wetlands, planting new trees and mangroves, which of course has the added benefit of protecting biodiversity.
But I cannot stress enough, offsetting emissions is not a viable route to net zero until you have overwhelmingly decarbonized your energy system. We are not going to plant enough trees or suck enough carbon out of the air to offset an 80% dirty energy system. A 5% system, maybe even a 10% system? Sure. It's for this reason that some gas is still burned in the hypothetical 2050 clean grid for the UK. Not because it's impossible to get to a 100% renewables grid, many academic studies have shown this to be possible, but because a 98% clean grid is much more feasible and cheaper.
Rather than having enough battery storage to see you through a month-long period with no wind and no sunlight, build enough to get you through 2 weeks. Those extra 2 weeks a year with limited use of gas power plants, if you capture their emissions in some way, achieves the same end result for less, at least based on current technology. This is something shown in this hypothetical UK 2030 grid. Gas kicks in for less than 2% of the time in the darkest wind-free days. Compensating for such limited emissions is definitely feasible.
But again, we cannot do this at scale. We can't keep doing what we are doing and just capture the carbon. It's not feasible, it's not going to happen. So you are not going to power the world on 100% clean energy. Not because renewables and nuclear aren't up to the task. They can absolutely generate enough energy, especially if you consider the massive efficiency gains that electrification brings. You're not going to do it because there are certain specific applications that require high energy densities. And based on current technologies, it is just not feasible to electrify those applications or make them run on a clean fuel. And that's okay up to a point, as long as you have a plan. And if you want to be part of the road to nearly 100% clean energy, there's an obvious way to do that. If you can, electrify processes in your life. Even if your electricity mix is not particularly clean, if you electrify the way that you move yourself around and the way that you heat your house, again, if you can, then you are reducing the amount of primary energy required and reducing our reliance on dirty energy.
Once the world works out how to price electricity in a renewables-dominated grid properly, and so electrified systems become massively cost competitive, you will see this tube fill up. And it's going to be quicker than you think. I just hope it's quick enough.
Of course, another way that you can be part of the journey to nearly 100% clean energy is working in the field of electrification. So installing and maintaining electrified systems or even inventing new ones.
Doing that requires specialist knowledge, such as how circuits work. If you would like to learn the physics of electricity, then an excellent place to do that is with this course on circuits, which you can access for free with this video's sponsor. Brilliant is an app offering thousands of interactive lessons in subjects across maths, science, and computer science. Their course on circuits assumes no prior knowledge and is broken down into bite-sized chunks, ideal to do in a few minutes each day on your phone, building an effective learning habit.
All of their courses are this interactive. They're designed by an award-winning team of researchers and teachers from Google, MIT, Stanford, lots of places, because interactive learning has been shown to be effective. Learning where you solve problems as you're introduced to new concepts has been shown to be 6 times more effective than just watching lectures.
And of course, if you would rather learn about data visualization, AI, or calculus, they have you covered with a huge library of courses, either to learn in self-directed study or to support learning in the classroom, something I definitely would have done at university.
To get access to everything Brilliant has to offer, head to brilliant.org/Simon Clark, which is linked in the description and in the QR code on screen right now. And if you find that the 30 days you get there are quite enough for you, you can also use that link to get a 20% discount on an annual subscription. That link again, brilliant.org/Simon Clark. Thank you so much for watching the video. I hope that you enjoyed it. I cannot wait to see my arguments be misrepresented in the comments over and over again. If you did like the video, please do the YouTube pleasantries, drop it a like, share it with somebody, subscribe to the channel if you're not already. And if you'd like to watch something else from me, then here's 2 videos I prepared earlier. That just leaves me to say thank you again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.